Wife discovers her millionaire husband was cheating on her with her best friend, but her revenge shocked the world. No one believed what she did. The massive windows of the Carter mansion in the heart of Manhattan reflected the perfect image of a life many would call a dream. Evelyn Carter, dressed impeccably in a blue silk gown, moved gracefully through the main hall, greeting guests with a warm smile. She was the perfect hostess, the admired wife. Jonathan Carter, her husband, stood just a few feet away, surrounded by businessmen and influential figures of the city. He spoke effortlessly, gestured with confidence, and his laughter echoed through the room like a rehearsed melody. Together, they were the ideal couple, the couple everyone envied. The two had built a solid reputation, a combination of power, charisma, and apparent harmony. Evelyn, always discreet, was known for supporting high society's charitable causes and for her natural elegance, while Jonathan, a multi-millionaire businessman, shone as a symbol of success and leadership. They seemed to have it all: wealth, respect, and an unshakable marriage. Yet, like a flawless painting that begins to fade under the light of time, the truth behind that perfect picture was far from revealed. Madeline Hayes, Evelyn's best friend, was a constant presence in the couple's life. With her striking beauty and captivating personality, she was always around, at elegant dinners, trips, or private moments within the Carters' inner circle. Evelyn trusted Madeline blindly. They had been friends since college, and Evelyn believed their friendship was one of the few genuine things in a world full of facades. Madeline was almost like a sister, someone with whom Evelyn shared secrets, joys, and even the most vulnerable moments of her life. That night, during the grand charity event hosted by the Carters, Evelyn felt a slight pang of unease. Jonathan seemed distant, too engrossed in his business conversations. It wasn't unusual, of course. He had always been a busy man, but Evelyn noticed something subtle had changed. His smiles toward her were shorter, and his eyes, usually bright when looking at her, now seemed distracted. She quickly brushed off the thought, blaming work pressure and the strain of organizing such an event. Madeline, on the other hand, was radiant. She moved through the hall with the confidence of someone who knew they were admired. Always at Jonathan's side, she laughed at his jokes with an intimacy that Evelyn attributed to their long-standing friendship. Evelyn felt proud of the relationship they shared. To her, Jonathan and Madeline were like allies in her life, two people she loved and trusted above all. As the guests began to leave, Jonathan disappeared to take a business call, leaving Evelyn and Madeline alone. Sitting on one of the white leather sofas in the living room, Evelyn looked at her friend fondly. "You know, Madeline, sometimes I think I couldn't handle all this without you and Jonathan. You're my support, my family. I'm truly blessed to have you both in my life." Madeline smiled, but there was something in her gaze Evelyn couldn't decipher. It was a mix of sympathy and something more, something Evelyn ignored, as she always did when something felt out of place. After all, who would doubt a friendship like theirs? Who would dare question a marriage like the Carters? For Evelyn, those questions didn't even exist. Before we continue this thrilling story, I have a special request. Subscribe to the channel and help me reach the much-dreamed-of 1,000 subscribers. Now, let's continue. The following morning, Evelyn woke early as usual. Jonathan had already left for an important meeting, but had left a sweet note on the breakfast table. "I can't wait to see you later, my love. You were stunning last night." She smiled as she read his words. He always had a way of being sweet when she least expected it, something that made her forget any fleeting discomfort. It was this duality in Jonathan that made her fall for him over and over again, even after all these years together. As she organized her daily tasks, Evelyn began to notice small details that left her uneasy. Once, while looking for something in Jonathan's office, she found a perfume that wasn't hers. Another time, she saw Madeline quickly ending a call when Evelyn entered the room, laughing nervously before changing the subject. Small things, but together, they began to form a shadow in her mind. However, Evelyn was the type of person who preferred to believe the best in people. She ignored her darker instincts, focusing on what she believed to be real, her husband's love and her best friend's friendship. But deep down, something inside her began to shift. It was a subtle feeling, almost imperceptible, like a tiny thread of distrust slowly growing. One afternoon, while Jonathan was out and Madeline stopped by for an unexpected visit, Evelyn noticed a sly look from her friend toward a portrait of Jonathan in the living room. There was nothing explicit, but there was something there, a charged emotion Evelyn couldn't understand. She quickly dismissed the idea, telling herself she was being paranoid. "You're just tired, Evelyn, that's all." Evelyn turned her attention back to the tea she was serving, unaware that at that moment, the veil of perfection was beginning to unravel, revealing the first signs of a truth that would change her life forever. Evelyn Carter's routine began to change subtly but disturbingly. Jonathan, who had always been methodical in his habits, started behaving erratically. Calls he used to take openly in the living room were now whispered behind the closed door of his office. The muffled sound of his voice, heavy with a tone Evelyn couldn't decipher, echoed through the house like a shadow that followed her. One morning, while having coffee, Evelyn tried to make conversation about a trip Jonathan had planned to Chicago. He used to be enthusiastic about sharing work details, explaining the projects he was involved in, but that day his response was evasive. "It's just a routine meeting," he said, without looking up from his phone. He seemed nervous, his attention divided between the message he was typing and the coffee cooling on the table. Evelyn tried to smile but felt a tightness in her chest. "Maybe I could come with you. It's been a while since we traveled together," she suggested, trying to sound casual. Jonathan quickly dismissed the idea. "It'll be exhausting. Just endless meetings. Better for you to stay here and rest," he replied, standing abruptly. He leaned in to kiss her forehead, but the gesture was so brief, it left more questions than comfort. Evelyn watched as he walked out the door, feeling the emptiness grow. Her mind started searching for explanations for his behavior. Was it just work stress? An important deal he didn't want to share to spare her from worry? Evelyn shook her head, trying to push away intrusive thoughts. She had a solid marriage, a husband who had always respected her, and a life built on trust. There was no reason to doubt him, but the signs kept appearing like puzzle pieces Evelyn couldn't fit together. A few days later, while putting away Jonathan's clothes in his closet, Evelyn found something that made her heart race. A delicate woman's handkerchief, neatly folded with a distinct perfume she didn't recognize, was in the pocket of one of his coats. It was a sweet, seductive scent, completely different from the perfume Evelyn used. She held the handkerchief in her hands, feeling her head spin as she tried to rationalize. Maybe it belonged to a colleague, something accidental. Jonathan had always been kind and chivalrous. Perhaps he was just helping someone. But why would he keep it in his pocket? She put the handkerchief back, feeling a wave of anxiety that lingered for the rest of the day. Madeline's presence also began to feel excessive. Evelyn had always appreciated her friend's company, but lately Madeline seemed to be around more often than usual. Whether it was casual visits or planned dinners, Madeline was always present, with witty comments and laughter that filled the silence when Jonathan seemed distant. One evening, as Madeline laughed at a joke Jonathan made during dinner, Evelyn noticed something that unsettled her. It was just a look, but it carried an intensity that felt out of place. Jonathan quickly looked away, as if sensing he was being watched, while Madeline continued speaking as if nothing had happened. Evelyn took a deep breath, determined not to let paranoia take over, but the moment was etched in her mind. Jonathan's business trips also became more frequent. His once organized and predictable schedule was now filled with unexpected commitments that arose at the last minute. Evelyn tried to keep up, asking about the details, but he always had a ready answer, a carefully formulated excuse that left little room for questioning. One of the most painful moments occurred over a weekend when Jonathan claimed he needed to work late at the office. Evelyn decided to surprise him with lunch, something she occasionally did to remind him how much she loved him. However, when she arrived at the company building, the receptionist informed her that Jonathan wasn't there. He had left earlier that morning and hadn't mentioned when he'd return. Evelyn drove back home, fighting back tears that threatened to spill. She didn't want to believe he could be lying to her, but each event seemed to reinforce that possibility. During the drive, she remembered something Jonathan had said to her years ago, during a candlelit dinner, on one of their first trips together. "You are my anchor, Evelyn, my only certainty." Now, those words echoed in her mind like a cruel irony. When she arrived home, she found Madeline waiting in the living room, as if she knew Evelyn would need company. Her friend seemed relaxed, but there was something in her posture that Evelyn couldn't decipher. "Are you okay, dear?" Madeline asked, her tone almost too sweet. Evelyn nodded, forcing a smile. "Yes, of course, just a bit tired." As Madeline served tea, Evelyn observed the way she moved around the space. Madeline had always been confident, but now she seemed to have a more dominant presence, as if she knew the environment better than she should. Evelyn looked away, suppressing the thoughts that began to take shape in her mind. That night, as she lay in the empty bed, the unfamiliar scent of the handkerchief seemed to fill the room. Evelyn tried to rationalize again, but something inside her had begun to change. The pain of imagining Jonathan might be hiding something was unbearable, but the fear of confronting the truth was even greater. For now, she decided not to act. She maintained the facade of a loyal and confident wife, suppressing her doubts and clinging to the hope that everything was just a misunderstanding. But deep down, Evelyn knew the cracks in her perfect life were widening, and whatever was hidden behind them would come to light sooner or later. It was a grey morning, with heavy clouds that seemed to reflect the weight in Evelyn Carter's heart. She stood in the kitchen, holding a steaming cup of tea, trying to warm the coldness she felt inside, a void caused not by the weather, but by the unease growing in her mind. Jonathan had left early, as he had been doing for months, claiming he had an important meeting. He was in a rush, but still kissed her on the forehead before leaving, as he did every morning. The gesture, once comforting, now felt rehearsed, empty, almost mechanical. Evelyn sat at the table, staring at the phone. Something in her intuition told her there was more to his absence than he admitted. For weeks she had ignored signs, brushed aside intrusive thoughts, and tried to convince herself she was just being paranoid. But the puzzle pieces were starting to come together. The unexplained absence from his office, the unfamiliar perfume on the handkerchief, the furtive glances between Jonathan and Madeline. Everything pointed to something Evelyn didn't want to face, but knew she could no longer avoid. Holding the phone in her hand, Evelyn decided to call Madeline. She needed to hear her friend's voice, to find some relief, some confirmation that it was all in her head. "Madeline, dear," she began, trying to sound casual, "I was thinking, how about we go out today? Just the two of us for lunch, like old times." On the other end of the line, Madeline's voice came with a slight hesitation but carried her usual sugary tone. "Oh, Evelyn, I'd love to, but I'm out of town. A last-minute trip, you know how it is. How about the weekend?" Evelyn narrowed her eyes, unwilling to admit something was wrong even to herself. She knew Madeline well enough to notice the nuances in her tone. "Of course, no problem. Enjoy your trip," Evelyn replied, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. After hanging up, Evelyn remained silent, staring into the void. Her mind spun, each word Madeline spoke sounding like a lie. She decided she couldn't ignore it any longer. She needed to know the truth, no matter how much it might destroy her. Evelyn went to Jonathan's office and opened his computer. He rarely left anything open, but to her surprise, she found an email still on the screen. The subject line of the message seemed harmless, but the content was devastating. Jonathan had reserved a suite at an expensive hotel, with dates and times matching exactly when he had claimed to be on a business trip. The words danced on the screen, each one cutting like a knife. Evelyn felt her hands tremble, but she didn't let the pain consume her. Not yet. She needed more evidence. Something undeniable. Then she made a decision she never thought she'd have to make. She used the tracker in Jonathan's car, a feature he himself had installed for security reasons. With trembling fingers, she entered the password, her heart racing. When the location appeared on the screen, she saw that he was parked at an address she didn't recognize. The name of the luxurious hotel was unmistakable. Evelyn grabbed her car keys, her heart heavy, but her resolve guiding every move. She drove to the location, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. Every mile felt like an eternity. She thought about the nights they had spent together, the promises they had made, the life they had built side by side. How could he betray all of that? When she arrived at the hotel, Evelyn parked on a nearby street and watched from a distance. It didn't take long before she saw Jonathan exiting through the main entrance, accompanied by Madeline. They were laughing, talking casually as if the world around them didn't exist. Jonathan held Madeline's hand with an intimacy Evelyn knew all too well. It was the same touch that had once been hers. Evelyn felt a sharp pain in her chest, so strong she thought she might not be able to breathe. Silent tears streamed down her face, but she refused to make a sound, even though she was alone. She didn't want to be heard, not even by herself. Her pain was so deep, it felt like an open wound, but her mind was already working differently. She stayed there, frozen, watching them. It was like watching a scene from a movie, something so surreal her brain struggled to process it. She wanted to get out of the car, to scream, to confront them in front of everyone, but something inside her held her back. Evelyn knew that losing control would give them power, and she refused to be weak. Taking a deep breath, she wiped her face. Her mind was now clearer than ever. If there was one thing she had learned from years by Jonathan's side, it was the importance of strategy and patience. She wouldn't explode at that moment, or even that week. It wasn't the time to react. It was the time to plan. Back at home, Evelyn sat on the couch and closed her eyes for a moment. The image of Jonathan and Madeline laughing together was etched in her mind, but she forced herself to push the pain deep into her heart. When Jonathan arrived home hours later, with some excuse about a meeting running late, Evelyn greeted him with a smile and a kiss. Her calm was so convincing, it even seemed to surprise him. "How was your day?" Evelyn asked, her tone as soft as ever. Jonathan smiled, relieved as if she were incapable of suspecting anything. "Exhausting but productive," he replied, grabbing a glass of wine she had poured for him. Evelyn watched him, her mind cold and calculating, while her heart still bled inside. Every word, every gesture was like a move on a chessboard, where she was carefully planning her final play. She knew her pain wouldn't disappear quickly, but now she had something more powerful than sorrow, the truth. And with the truth, Evelyn began to craft the plan that would change their lives forever. A few days later, Evelyn watched the grey skies from her window, rain falling heavily that afternoon, covering the Carter mansion's windows with streams of droplets like tears. Her heart was heavy with a mix of emotions she tried to hide. The atmosphere was tense, even though Jonathan was out on one of his usual business meetings. Evelyn, now colder and more calculated, knew exactly what he was doing. Her facade of a loyal and devoted wife hadn't changed, but inside she was a different woman, someone who carried her pain like a weapon, waiting for the right moment to wield it. A few hours later, while reading in her favorite armchair, the phone rang. Evelyn frowned at the sight of an unknown number on the screen but answered it. The voice on the other end was urgent and restrained. "Mrs. Carter, this is the Manhattan Police Department. We regret to inform you there was an accident involving your husband's vehicle, Jonathan Carter. Unfortunately, he did not survive." Evelyn's world froze. For a moment, she couldn't react, her eyes fixed on nothing as the words repeated in her mind like an endless echo. Dead. Jonathan was dead. She placed the phone down with trembling hands, but the confusion in her mind was greater than the shock. For weeks, she had prepared to confront Jonathan, planned every detail of her revenge, and now it had all been taken from her in an instant, without warning. Relief and anger mixed with pain and disbelief. Tears threatened to fall, but she held them back. There was no time to cry. Not now. The funeral was a spectacle of hypocrisy, just as Evelyn had expected. The city's elite attended in droves, all mourning the loss of a man they barely knew but whose fortune they admired. Madeline was there, dressed in black and wearing a mask of sadness that Evelyn almost admired for its skillful deception. "Darling, I can't imagine your pain," Madeline said, wrapping Evelyn in a false, tight embrace. Evelyn returned the gesture, smelling the unmistakable perfume of the woman who had shared her husband's bed. "Thank you, Madeline," Evelyn replied in a soft, composed tone. Her eyes, however, showed nothing but ice. "It's good to know I have you here." Madeline tried to stay close throughout the service, holding Evelyn's hand when she thought it necessary, and even shedding a few strategically placed tears. Evelyn, however, noticed every nuance, every fleeting glance Madeline threw toward the casket. There was something more there, a hidden fear in her posture that Evelyn recognized. When all the guests began to leave, Evelyn stayed near the grave, watching as the earth was thrown over Jonathan's casket. For the first time since the accident, she allowed a single tear to slide down her face. It wasn't for the loss of a husband or a man she had loved. It was for the loss of her chance to confront him, to make him feel the pain he had inflicted on her. The following week, Evelyn received a formal invitation to Jonathan's will reading. Madeline, ever present since the accident, offered to accompany her. "Evelyn, darling, I can go with you. I don't think you should face this alone," Madeline said, placing a hand on her shoulder, her voice heavy with false concern. Evelyn took a deep breath, keeping her expression calm. "Thank you, Madeline, but I'd prefer to go alone. This is something very personal. I need space to process it." Madeline hesitated, but eventually accepted with a forced smile. "If you need me, you know where to find me." Evelyn responded with a brief smile before grabbing her keys and leaving. Inside, she felt unsettled, but couldn't let it show. She knew Madeline was more interested in the contents of the will than her well-being, and the last thing she wanted was to give her friend the satisfaction of being present. The lawyer's office was cold and austere, with walls lined with shelves full of legal books. The dark wooden desk occupied the center of the room, and the lawyer, a middle-aged man with a rigid posture, waited with a sealed envelope in front of him. Evelyn entered with firm steps, clutching her handbag tightly, as if it were an anchor keeping her upright. "Mrs. Carter," said the lawyer, standing to greet her, "I know this is a difficult moment. I'll do my best to ensure everything is handled with respect and clarity." "Thank you," Evelyn replied, sitting in the chair opposite him. Her voice was serene, but her eyes were sharp, alert to every detail. The lawyer opened the envelope slowly, as if every movement carried the weight of what was to come. He began reading formalities about minor assets left to charities, household staff, and other beneficiaries. Evelyn listened, but her mind was focused on what truly mattered, what Jonathan had left for her. Finally, the lawyer paused and looked directly at her. "This next part is addressed exclusively to you, Evelyn." Evelyn straightened her posture, ready to listen. "To my wife, Evelyn Carter, I leave my entire fortune, properties, bank accounts, investments, and personal belongings. Evelyn, you have always been the foundation of my life. Even in my worst moments, you stood by me with patience and loyalty." The words felt almost ironic to Evelyn, considering the weight of the secret she carried. Still, she maintained her composure, nodding slightly as the lawyer continued. "However, I must confess something I carry with deep shame. For years I was unfaithful to you, maintaining a relationship with Madeline Hayes. My weakness made me vulnerable to her manipulation, and although I was complicit in our actions, I know she took advantage of my position and my vulnerabilities. I never had the courage to end this relationship or confront my flaws." The words hit Evelyn like stones. Despite already knowing the truth, hearing it laid bare like this felt like reliving the pain for the first time. She felt her stomach churn, but took a deep breath, keeping her expression neutral. "Additionally," the lawyer continued, "I trust you to make the fairest decision. I leave it to your discretion whether Madeline Hayes should receive any portion of the inheritance. The choice is yours, Evelyn, and I know you will know what to do. Forgiveness is a virtue I have always admired in you, even knowing I do not deserve it." The silence that followed was crushing. Evelyn remained motionless, her gaze fixed on the desk, as the lawyer closed the envelope and set it aside. "Mrs. Carter, I know this may be difficult to process," he said in a softer tone. "If you need time, I can assist you with the next steps when you're ready." Evelyn lifted her gaze, her eyes gleaming with a mix of pain and determination. "Thank you, Mr. Bennett. I need some time to think about all of this." She stood, adjusting her handbag on her shoulder, and shook the lawyer's hand before leaving. As she walked through the office hallways, the weight of Jonathan's confession and the responsibility he had left her felt almost crushing. But Evelyn was strong. She had endured betrayals and lies without losing her composure, and she wouldn't falter now. In the car, parked on a quiet street, Evelyn allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. She rested her head on the steering wheel and closed her eyes, feeling the hot tears stream down her face. Jonathan's words echoed in her mind, especially his final one, forgiveness. Did he expect her to forgive Madeline, the same woman who had destroyed her trust, who had betrayed her so deeply? But Evelyn knew she needed more than forgiveness or revenge. She needed clarity, a plan. She wiped her tears and took a deep breath. When she returned home, she found Madeline waiting for her, sitting in the living room with an expression Evelyn now recognized as false concern. "How did it go?" Madeline asked, trying to sound sincere. "It was hard," Evelyn replied with a faint smile. "Jonathan left me with a lot to sort out." Madeline tilted her head, studying Evelyn. "If you need help with anything, you know I'm here." Evelyn nodded, maintaining her smile, but her mind was elsewhere. She knew Madeline was waiting for something, eager to find out what Jonathan had left her. Evelyn, however, had no intention of giving her any satisfaction. That night, alone in her bedroom, Evelyn reread Jonathan's words in the will. Despite the betrayal, she felt an unexpected calm. He had given her something far more valuable than forgiveness: power. Evelyn knew that the decision she would make would change everything, but before acting, she needed time. Time to plan, to turn her pain into strength, and to ensure that in the end she would have complete control. The days following the reading of the will were a test of endurance for Evelyn Carter. Outwardly, she maintained the impeccable appearance of a grieving widow devastated by loss. She wore black constantly, appeared at charity events in Jonathan's memory, and received condolences with the same grace and poise that had always defined her. Inside, however, a storm brewed. The revelations in Jonathan's will not only confirmed what she already knew, but also placed a burden on her that he could never have imagined. She had absolute power, but along with it, a dilemma that consumed her thoughts. Each night in her empty bed, Evelyn pondered, What should she do about Madeline? Forgiveness was a virtue she had always cultivated, but in the face of betrayal, was it right to let Madeline walk away unscathed? Sitting by the fire one cold evening, Evelyn watched the flames dance while holding a glass of wine. Her mind oscillated between the pain of betrayal and the responsibility of deciding the fate of the woman who had pretended to be her friend. What bothered her most was Madeline's audacity to remain close to her, as if nothing had happened. Each visit, each sweet word of support, was a constant reminder of the mask Madeline wore. And Evelyn knew that if she wanted to unmask her, she needed to act smartly. Madeline, as expected, intensified her presence. She appeared unannounced, bringing home-cooked meals and offering comforting words. "You shouldn't stay so alone, Evelyn," Madeline said one afternoon, sitting beside her on the living room sofa. "I know how hard it is to lose someone who meant so much. I'm here for you, always." Evelyn looked at Madeline, her eyes calmly taking in every detail. There was something almost comical about the scene. To any casual observer, Madeline might have seemed genuine, but Evelyn knew exactly what lay behind that mask. "You're an incredible friend, Madeline," Evelyn replied with a soft smile. "I don't know what I'd do without you." The compliment had the desired effect. Madeline visibly relaxed, crossing her legs and picking up her teacup with a satisfied smile. Evelyn knew Madeline believed she had everything under control, and that only made Evelyn feel more powerful. While Madeline continued her usual chatter, Evelyn was already planning her next move. She decided it was time to test the limits of her friend to see how far Madeline would go to maintain her privileged position. The week after, Evelyn organized a small dinner at her home, inviting a few of Jonathan's close associates. Among the guests was Paul, an old colleague of Jonathan who knew a lot about his activities and might unintentionally expose something Madeline didn't want revealed. Evelyn observed closely as Madeline interacted with Paul. At first, she held her composure, but as Paul began mentioning suspicious trips and meetings, Evelyn noticed discomfort growing on Madeline's face. "Jonathan always had a peculiar way of disappearing during crucial moments," Paul remarked casually, unaware of the impact of his words. Madeline laughed nervously, glancing at Evelyn as if seeking support. "Oh, Jonathan really was unpredictable, wasn't he, Evelyn?" Evelyn gave a cryptic smile and replied calmly, "Yes, Madeline. You knew him so well, almost as well as I did." The tension in the air was palpable, but Madeline covered it with another forced laugh, quickly changing the subject. Evelyn, however, felt satisfied. This was just the beginning. A few days later, Evelyn invited Madeline to join her on a visit to Jonathan's grave. She wanted to observe her friend's reaction in a more intimate setting, away from society's watchful eyes. As they stood in the cemetery, Evelyn remained silent, watching Madeline from the corner of her eye. "Jonathan would have done anything for you," Madeline said, looking at the grave. "He was crazy about you, Evelyn." "Do you think so?" Evelyn replied quietly. "Sometimes. I wonder if I really knew him." Madeline turned to Evelyn, surprised by her response. "Of course you did. You two were perfect together." Evelyn looked directly into Madeline's eyes, searching for any cracks in her facade. For a brief moment she saw something, a flicker of guilt or maybe fear. "Do you think he was perfect?" Evelyn asked, her tone almost challenging. Madeline hesitated before replying. "Everyone makes mistakes, Evelyn, but he loved you, and that's what matters." Evelyn gave a small smile, hiding her rage behind a serene expression. "It's good to hear that," she said, turning back to the grave. That night, as she prepared for bed, Evelyn sat on the edge of her bed, holding a photo of Jonathan in her hands. As much as she felt anger toward him, there was also a lingering pain for the man she once believed was the love of her life. But she knew that pain had to be set aside. There was something bigger at stake, and Evelyn was determined not to remain a victim in this story. Madeline, on the other hand, began to notice subtle changes in Evelyn. There was something different about the way she spoke, the way she looked at her. What once seemed like fragility now carried a trace of silent strength that made Madeline uneasy. Still, she didn't dare pull away. She needed to ensure she remained in Evelyn's life, believing she could still manipulate the situation to her advantage. Evelyn knew she was close to achieving what she wanted. Madeline was starting to show cracks, but Evelyn wasn't ready to reveal her hand yet. She already had a plan, and was organizing every detail to execute it. The main hall of the Carter mansion was packed to capacity, every corner filled with familiar faces from high society. The charity gala in Jonathan Carter's memory promised to be a grand evening, a celebration of legacy and generosity. White roses adorned the space, while the crystal chandeliers cast a soft glow over the elegantly arranged tables. Evelyn watched the guests arrive, her posture impeccable and her expression that of an elegant widow, hiding the storm brewing inside her. Her plan was set. This was the night of her liberation, and every detail had been carefully orchestrated. Madeline arrived in a tight red dress that contrasted sharply with Evelyn's modest and sophisticated black attire. She seemed confident, even radiant, greeting the guests as if she were a co-host. Evelyn observed her from afar, feeling a pang of irony. Madeline truly believed she was in control. "Evelyn, darling, what a wonderful evening," Madeline said as she approached, placing her hand gently on Evelyn's shoulder. "Jonathan would be so proud of you." "Thank you, Madeline," Evelyn replied, her tone warm, almost maternal. "It's comforting to know I can count on my best friend." Madeline didn't catch the subtle bite in Evelyn's words, and Evelyn turned to engage another group of guests before Madeline could extend the conversation. After dinner, the speeches began, and the atmosphere grew heavier as Evelyn ascended the stage. She was flawless, wearing a long black dress with minimalist details that accentuated her graceful posture and the seriousness of the occasion. The room fell silent as she approached the microphone. "Good evening, everyone," Evelyn began, her voice clear and calm, filling the space. "Thank you for being here tonight to honor Jonathan's memory. He was a man who impacted many lives and believed above all in the importance of giving back to the community." There was a brief murmur of approval among the guests. Evelyn paused, surveying the crowd with eyes that seemed to see beyond the surface. "Jonathan was many things," she continued softly. "A man passionate about his work, an admired leader, and above all, someone who believed in the importance of human connections. He had a special ability to make people feel important." Evelyn let her words linger before continuing. "But tonight I'd like to invite someone very special to join me on stage. My best friend and confidant, Madeline Hayes." The room fell into stunned silence. Madeline, seated in the front row with a smile that barely concealed her nervousness, froze for a moment before standing up. The blush on her cheeks betrayed that she hadn't expected to be called, but with the poise of someone used to being the center of attention, she adjusted her red dress and walked to the stage. Evelyn welcomed her with a warm smile and offered her the microphone. "Madeline, you've always been by my side during the hardest times. I think it's only fair that you share a few words about Jonathan since you were so close to both of us." Madeline hesitated briefly, but took the microphone, forcing a confident smile. "Of course, Evelyn, it would be my pleasure." She turned to the audience, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "Jonathan was an incredible man, hard-working, dedicated. He always put the people he loved first. Being here tonight to honor him is an opportunity I'll always treasure." As Madeline spoke, Evelyn kept her smile, but her eyes remained cold and calculating. When Madeline finished and handed back the microphone, clearly relieved, Evelyn stepped forward. "Thank you, Madeline," Evelyn said, gripping the microphone firmly. "Your words are touching, and truly, Jonathan had that ability to be close to people. So close, in fact, that sometimes the lines between loyalty and betrayal became blurred." The silence in the room was instant. Madeline's smile vanished, and she took a small step back, but Evelyn had already taken control of the moment. "When Jonathan passed, I was forced to face a pain I never imagined feeling," Evelyn said, pausing deliberately. "But loss also brought important lessons. It taught me that behind appearances, there are truths we're often not ready to face. Tonight is not just about Jonathan. It's about the strength to move forward even when everything seems to be falling apart. Jonathan and I had a marriage that to many seemed perfect," Evelyn said, turning slightly toward Madeline, though subtly. "But perfection is an illusion, and what's hidden behind appearances is not always what it seems." The murmurs among the guests grew louder. Evelyn remained steady, unhurried. "I discovered after his death that Jonathan had secrets," she continued. "Secrets that brought me a pain few can understand. But tonight I'm not here to talk about pain. I'm here to talk about resilience, about finding strength in the darkest moments." The room was now completely silent. All eyes were on Evelyn, and Madeline seemed to struggle to maintain her composure. "To honor Jonathan, I want to share something with all of you," Evelyn said, gesturing toward the screen behind her. The slideshow changed, now displaying a series of text messages exchanged between Jonathan and Madeline. The words were clear and direct, revealing their intimacy. There were declarations of love, plans for secret meetings, and even disrespectful mentions of Evelyn. The room erupted in shocked whispers. Madeline turned pale, her eyes wide as she stared at the screen. Evelyn, however, remained calm, as though everything had been carefully rehearsed. And it had. "These messages," Evelyn said, turning back to the audience, "are just part of something bigger. A betrayal not only against me, but against everything Jonathan claimed to value." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. "However, I'm not here to seek revenge. I'm here to show that the truth has a power that even death cannot erase." Evelyn then displayed a segment of Jonathan's will, where he admitted his betrayal and apologized to her. The lawyer's voice, recorded during the reading, echoed through the room, leaving the guests in stunned silence. "I had to decide what to do with this," Evelyn said, finally turning directly to Madeline. "And I've decided the world deserves to know the truth." Madeline, now completely defeated, tried to retreat, but the judgmental stares surrounding her froze her in place. She muttered something inaudible, but Evelyn had already turned her focus back to the crowd. "This night is not about betrayal," Evelyn said, her voice growing stronger. "It's about new beginnings. It's about turning pain into strength and ensuring that no one, absolutely no one, robs you of your dignity or your ability to rise again." The applause started slowly, then grew, filling the hall. Evelyn stood on stage, a figure of strength and elegance, while Madeline, humiliated, slipped away among the crowd. It wasn't just the public humiliation of Madeline that gave Evelyn satisfaction, but the fact that she had reclaimed her dignity and control of her own story. Evelyn stepped off the stage as the applause continued. She knew that night would be remembered not as a tribute to Jonathan, but as the day she redefined her story and freed herself from the weight of her past. The night of the event ended with a mix of murmurs and commotion. As the guests left the Carter mansion, many whispered about the revelations they had just witnessed. Evelyn remained poised, bidding farewell to each guest with a calm smile, showing no arrogance. It was the kind of serenity only someone who had won an internal and external battle could possess. Madeline, on the other hand, had vanished. After her public disgrace, she fled without looking back, leaving behind the echoes of her fall. The next morning, her name and face were splashed across newspapers and gossip websites. "Elite scandal, lover and best friend exposed at charity event," read one headline. "The power of truth. Evelyn Carter faces betrayal with elegance," said another, accompanied by a picture of Evelyn on stage, her head held high, while Madeline could be seen in the background fleeing. On social media, the hashtag #JustTeamEvelyn went viral. Thousands of women shared messages of support, admiring the strength and poise Evelyn displayed. "An example of how to turn pain into power," one user wrote. Evelyn, now a public figure, became a symbol of resilience and empowerment, something she had never imagined achieving. Despite this, Evelyn didn't feel complete satisfaction when she read the headlines. A lingering melancholy remained, a sense that, even with her victory, part of her life had been irreparably shattered. But this melancholy didn't paralyze her. On the contrary, it fueled her to create something greater, something that would give meaning to the pain she had endured. As the days passed, Madeline remained in hiding. Her absence became a mystery. Some said she had left the country, while others claimed she was in seclusion, unable to face the public eye. Evelyn didn't care to find out. To her, Madeline was a closed chapter. With the fortune Jonathan had left and her newfound influence, Evelyn began drafting a plan she had been nurturing since the day she heard Jonathan's will, to create an organization to support women who, like her, had been betrayed, manipulated, or silenced in their relationships. She wanted to use her experience and resources to change lives, to give a voice to women who didn't have the same privileges she did. At the launch of the foundation, called Rebirth, Evelyn delivered a speech that was broadcast live to millions. Dressed in white, the color of renewal, she spoke with both strength and emotion. "For too long, I let pain and betrayal define who I was. But today I choose something different. I choose to be the woman who transforms her pain into strength, who refuses to let what was taken from her dictate her future. Rebirth is more than a foundation. It's a movement. It's a promise that no one will be left without support, and that everyone deserves a chance to start over." The audience rose in applause, and Evelyn felt a wave of emotion wash over her. It wasn't just about the recognition of her strength. It was the confirmation that her pain had been transformed into something meaningful, something that could help others. As Evelyn rebuilt her life, Madeline faced the consequences of her actions. Shunned by society, friendless and alone, she lived in isolation, surviving precariously. She reached out to influential acquaintances, but no one wanted to be associated with the scandal. Her image was irreparably tarnished, and her fall was as complete as her ambition had once been vast. Evelyn, however, didn't let herself be consumed by Madeline's downfall. Her life was now dedicated to her foundation and rediscovering herself. She traveled, explored new places, and pursued passions she had abandoned during her marriage. She learned to play the piano, something she had always wanted to do, but never found time for. She bought a house in Tuscany, where she spent weeks cultivating vineyards and writing a book about her experience. One sunny morning in Tuscany, Evelyn walked through a field, feeling the gentle warmth of the sun on her face. It was a stark contrast to the cold, lonely nights she had endured months earlier. Surrounded by the simplicity of nature and the peace she had found within herself, Evelyn realized something important. Forgiveness wasn't for Madeline or Jonathan. It was for herself. Forgiving meant freeing herself from the weight of carrying grudges that would only hold her back from moving forward. Madeline never reappeared, neither in Evelyn's life nor in society. But Evelyn didn't need a dramatic closure to that part of the story. She knew that by continuing to live, by allowing herself to be happy again, she had already won. Months later, during an interview with a prestigious magazine, Evelyn was asked what she believed was the best revenge against those who had hurt her. She smiled calmly and replied, "The best revenge is living well, and that's exactly what I'm doing." Evelyn Carter, once reduced to the victim of a betrayal, became a symbol of strength, resilience, and independence. She had transformed her pain into something that touched lives, and above all, she had freed herself from the weight of the past. Her future was hers, and she wouldn't allow anyone to define it ever again. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more like it, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Don't miss the video appearing on your screen now. Click to keep following stories that will move you.